Okay, so I have the next slot in the programme. Just by way of introduction, I'm a director here at Wragge & Co and head up our corporate energy offering. We're an international law firm across a number of locations. We have about just over 1,000 people. My background's M&A, but I've become more and more immersed in the sector, various different subsectors, and I've picked out some renewables, although the first one is deliberately provocative, in that I've done some work in the nuclear sector. That's very topical given the energy bill coming out today. I've recently, I've been on secondment to Infinis. That's something that's coming to a close, but they're the leading independent renewable energy generator in the UK. They're involved in landfill gas, hydro and wind. I've recently helped them close a project finance facility for onshore wind, another very topical subject in energy at the moment. And my first taste of biofuels really was working with BP. I advised them on their ethanol joint venture with British Sugar and DuPont, which some of you may know is Vivergo up in Hull. I also advised them subsequently on mainly the US and some UK aspects. So they've got a demonstration facility up in Hull as well, of Butamax, which is the attempt to go to the next stage, which no doubt will be a topic that we touch on later on. So I just put that slide up there, called it Assembling the Proposition. I'm conscious that that there's a range of people in the audience here, and not everyone is in the business of building large bits of kit bioethanol plant. However, wherever you are on this scale, whether you're an advisor or whether you are someone who's interested in investing or in technology or any other part of the supply chain, frankly, you will somehow hook into this diagram, which is really at its most basic level. And I guess overall the point I want to make is that there are very many relationships that need to come together to make it work. And those relationships drive a series of things to consider, which I've put up there. I've satellited them around, is it bankable? Which is again a topic that we might come on to a bit later on. But the reason why I've done that is I think it's the ability to access investment or in order to develop the proposition, or to know that when you've developed it at the end you're going to be able to exit it or get some further funding behind it. So how it all stacks up from a funding perspective is just something that I come across a lot in what I do. That then spills out a whole series of contracts, of course. You'll be glad to hear that I'm not going to take you through these item by item, not least because many of these relationships, of course, are common to lots of projects, not just those in the biofuel space. But there's a lot that needs to be formalised in order to make it work. And I just wanted to sort of pick out a few and focus on those. And of course, there are many more perspectives than the four I've put up there, but they are some important perspectives, and they're not necessarily all aligned with one another. So I thought it would be helpful just to pick out some of the perspectives of each of these on some of the material issues. And I've got some views on those, and I very much welcome those views being challenged. So the feedstock supplier, I guess the first question is really, who are you dealing with? And as we know, that the approaches can be different depending on whether, of what scale you are and the scale of the people that you are dealing with. Certainly on the larger plants, while I was chatting with Sam just before having a coffee and sort of sharing experiences, on the Vivergo deal that was done, that was working with Frontier, who essentially are an agribusiness who procure a lot of the grain for that plant. Not sure whether they do 100%. They certainly do the vast majority. And of course, any feedstock supplier is going to want to manage their risk, and there are lots of risks in that supply chain, for sure. But it really depends, who you are dealing with in this. It can be quite a range. And when it comes to pricing, again, there is a range of possibilities. And I guess what I'm seeing is that the way in which feedstock contracts are going, my experience has been you might get some fixed pricing up to a year. I'm not seeing much beyond that. I'm seeing a lot more links into maybe commodity price indexes, perhaps with some floors, perhaps with some caps. Again, interested to hear the views of others on that. In relation to the supply, of course, if you're supplying, you want to know that you've got some kind of guaranteed commitment from your counterparty to buy. Increasingly, though, I have seen some pressure on minimum volume delivery amounts with some pretty punitive mechanisms if those are not met. And also additional undertakings in relation to things like how much you are sowing per hectareage, and harvesting per hectareage as well. Much more interventionist approach. I know that some of the oil majors have had some interesting experiences that they've learned from, particularly when they've been delving into overseas relationships, things like Jatropha. So I think they've learned some lessons there. When we're acting for feedstock suppliers, obviously we're trying to resist these kinds of things because they really do attach some onerous remedies. Quality grade, crucial of course. The buyers seeking high alcohol yields, high processing efficiency, inevitably the varieties that are in play will be a factor here. There are undertakings in there as to starch content, moisture content, viscosity. These are typical things that you're seeing in these contracts. But more and more they're seeking to monitor and understand where the feedstock supplier is along the way in terms of sowing, in terms of harvesting, in terms of storage, etc., etc. I'll put the impact of weather because that's very topical. I guess at one extreme, the US droughts, there has been a lot of discussion and debate about what that's done to prices. We've just had a horrendous week, which to varying degrees, we will all be affected by the rainfall that we've had, and depending where we are in the sort of the sowing and harvesting cycle, that's going to have an impact on the crops that are sown. So it isn't an easy area, that one, and we're having increasingly difficult debates about things like force majeure. I mentioned substitute feedstocks. I've had one example recently where the developer there, or the buyer I should say, had the right to direct which type of feedstocks that supplier was going to be using in subsequent years, or going to be delivering in subsequent years, which was unusual. So I guess my recent experience has been a lot of pressure on the supplier, but as I said, I'd be interested to hear the views of others. The developer, less of a legal point, more about due diligence, this one. There are technology providers out there, many of them. They are at different stages. There are some who will JV with others. So, for example, they'll get together with EPC contractors. There are some with track records, some with track records in the UK, but not necessarily abroad, and the other way around as well. This goes to the procurement process, I would say. People generally don't want to be pioneers if they can avoid being a pioneer on something of this, of any scale. There are lots of incentives, or there were lots of incentives out there, I should say, but I'd encourage any developer to try and sort of see what there are. There are some, I mean, I referred a developer a couple of weeks ago to a competition that DEC were doing. There are some grants available still, but they are very thin on the ground. We've had the announcement about the Green Investment Bank a couple of days ago. I think it's probably early to understand whether that might be of interest and use to biofuels. I think this is really a key one. the technology is absolutely crucial to this. There are a lot of people out there developing things. What are they giving in terms of assurances, guarantees, undertakings on what they are doing? What are they saying about yields? Does it work? Fundamentally is the issue here. And these kinds of things, depending on whether you're an ethanol, that might attach to the pressing process, fermentation, distillation. If it's biodiesel, then transesterification, oil yields, and so on. I've also seen many technology providers quite rightly attaching conditions to the way in which things will work. You have to have the right environment, you have to have the right temperatures and so on. But I think that they've been getting more and more onerous, and it's been an interesting debate that I've seen on some of these contracts. The next two, really, I guess, commercial points and things that businesses like this will grapple with. Larger plants, I'd be interested to hear Sam's view on this, whether they're sourcing everything through one supplier, whether they want to leave gaps for the opportunities on the market on a spot basis, given the way commodity prices are going. Single sourcing, is that the right thing? The same variety, is that the right thing? It's an interesting debate, and one that a developer's always going to be wrangling with. The off-taker, I think these two, I've probably covered these a little earlier, so I'll skip over those somewhat, just to say that if you're the perspective of an oil major in particular, or frankly any other buyer, you're going to seek assurances on performance, on octane content. We see some interesting things around what happens if the blend goes wrong when you put it in. There's some interesting liability discussions going on there, and it would be usual for the off-taker to seek assurances that it meets RTFO requirements, and there's a whole host of information that needs to go with that too. Sustainable sourcing, the oil majors have for some time in particular had very developed processes around you will buy and do things in a way that meets our general requirements and our policies. They've had room to impose that for some time. They're going, in my experience, a step further and seeking to be more directive, suggesting that they can perhaps force a switch as feedstock availability and technology progresses. That's been a shift I have seen recently. RTFO obligations, of course, any suppliers of fuel over 450,000 litres per year, an obligation period, but typically a year, will be subject to the RTFO. They're going to need to have assurances from the supplier in relation to that. And I guess I tend to forget the co-product sometimes, and it's a hugely important piece of the puzzle, because the revenue streams that come from this, whether it's Jatropha cake, whether it's DDGS, whether it's something else, frankly, it could even be heat, water, all of the above really apply, and typically, obviously, it's the agricultural market here in the UK, agricultural feed, where this is hitting. So the funder will need to avail themselves of all of these issues, and it's the things that people are grappling with, and I guess from a legal perspective, that there are two sort of things that I say quite early on, which is that funder education is key. I do think there is an exercise still in that. There are other subsectors. I would say onshore wind has been more successful in educating the funding community. I think there's a piece of work there to be done. Certainly, if you are an individual developer or an individual technology provider that you're trying to commercialise, they come at this with scepticism. So you have to look at your own product with scepticism and try and meet their requirements and anticipate their questions. And then I guess the other end is if you are developing, say, a plant, then procurement processes, I think, set out early on that you are going to be going to the market for funding on this, because it's going to be in their interests that you're investable. And I think that the areas where I'm seeing that touching is the duration of contracts, so feedstock contracts in particular. The principle that they're going to need to enter into direct agreements with the funder, they don't like, but I think you've just got to table that one early on. And they're going to also seek security over key assets such as leases or assignment of key contracts. It's just going to happen. So I guess some conclusions and thoughts, particularly funder and developer, can sometimes be at odds on this one. The funder likes long-term, secure, and may drive, and I have seen this, you towards making sure that you've got everything locked down in contracts and 100% volumes done. That might be missing out on value from a developer perspective. I've seen that tension recently. Flexibility is desirable one, of course, isn't it always, but particularly in an area which is subject to so much change and also debate at the moment. I do wonder, I haven't seen it yet, that those of you, I don't know if any of you in the room are involved or come across sort of the power purchase agreements that you have in the electricity market. A hell of a lot of time is spent debating what may or may not happen as a result of things like the energy bill that's come out today. It sucks in so much resource trying to anticipate what might happen. I haven't seen that develop in the same way for biofuels. Maybe it will. I think let's see. And this, of course, plays into that, and I won't cover the ground that Geraint has covered already, but I think I've read that the 5% cap in 2020 that is being mooted, this is for biofuels that come from food crops. I think I've seen that we're in the EU, we're already at 4.75%. So it's sending signals out to the market that the market isn't going to like. And I guess I just mentioned this last one because I think that if I go back to the point of today, the energy bill coming out, if any of you've seen the build-up, there's just been a really untidy arm wrestle up to today between DEC, between Treasury. And the problem with that, I think most people in any industry can accept policy that is good or bad. They just don't like it inconsistent. And I don't think that the government sometimes, and certainly the EU, gets that capital is international and it will go elsewhere. So I think the problem is that then kind of winds its way through, and you end up having all these debates with your funders in particular about what might or might not happen. Thank you.